Welcome to the Sat-Coord IFIC Processing tutorial. In this tutorial I'll explain what IFIC Processing is, show you how to set up your own IFIC Processing template in Sat-Coord, and then run an example IFIC Processing and explain how to interpret the results. Planned satellite networks are published fortnightly by the ITU in the International Frequency Information Circular, or IFIC for short. You can find out more information on the IFIC by visiting the ITU website. A link is provided in the description below this video. The data included on the IFIC needs to be processed to examine the published filings to identify those that have the potential to cause harmful interference to the networks you wish to protect. It is very important to get the process right. In some cases, failure to comment on a specific network indicates both that you will not complain of harmful interference to your networks from that network, but also that your networks will not cause their network harmful interference. Administrations have 4 months after the date of publication of the IFIC to send their comments. The Sat-Coord IFIC Processing module has been set up to help administrations and operators ensure that their networks are properly protected. It provides independent analysis of many of the ITU coordination triggers to validate the ITU's findings, as well as the ability to examine in depth the reason for identification. Before you can use IFIC processing in Sat-Coord, you should ensure that you have set up your SNL Part B database. For more information on that, please see our SNL Part B database browsing tutorial. To start an IFIC processing task in Sat-Coord, click on the Tools menu item and then select IFIC Processing from the drop-down menu. In the IFIC Processing Setup dialog, we must specify the IFIC that we wish to process. The IFIC publication date as well as the expiry date are displayed for each IFIC. For example, IFIC 2780 was published on the 14th of October 2014, and comments must be received by the ITU by the 14th of February 2015. If you have set up your IFIC, SPS and Appendix 30B database directories in the Sat-Coord options, then Sat-Coord will attempt to automatically select the correct database associated with the IFIC from those directories. You can find out more information on this by watching our SNS database browsing tutorial or by looking at the Browse Database options. The last part of the IFIC processing setup is choosing a template to base the IFIC processing analysis on. The template defines our home administration and networks. To add a new template, click on the Add button on the toolbar. Adding a new template opens an IFIC Processing Template dialog. This dialog is split into 3 sections: Admin Data, Data Location, and Processing Options. The first section, Admin Data, lets us define our administration, our satellite organization if we have one, and our operator if required. It also allows us to define which territories we wish to protect. Under some provisions of the radio regulations, administrations are able to request the removal of their territories from the service area of published networks. For these cases, the territories chosen here will be examined. By default, all territories associated with an administration are selected. For this example, I'm going to arbitrarily choose the administration of the Czech Republic. I do not wish to specify a satellite organization, and I do not wish to specify an operator. The operators are taken from the operating agency field defined in a filing. Please note that if you specify an operator, then only filed networks with that operating agency will be included in your IFIC processing analysis, and some filings, such as advanced publication information, include no operating agency and so will not be included. Once we have defined the administration data, we should choose the data location part of the template and now define the databases in which our network's data is located. You can specify as many databases as you wish, and you can also specify specific criteria to restrict the data that is included. By default, these databases will be filtered to only include the administration, satellite organization, and operating agency defined in the administration data, but you can further filter them here too if you wish. Let me add first the most recent SOS database by clicking on the Add button and then selecting the SOS database. Next, let me add the most recent SPS database. And lastly, the most recent Appendix 30B database. If I wish to add extra criteria to a specific database, I can click on the Edit Criteria button on the toolbar. This will open a search dialog. Here we can define criteria. For example, I could add that the frequency band must be the C-band if I only wanted to include the C-band portion of networks of my administration in this database. However, I do not want to specify any additional criteria, so I'll click on Cancel. When I have finished defining the databases I want to use, I can click on the Browse Networks button at the bottom, and Sat-Coord will show me all of the data which is to be included in the IFIC processing analysis. We can see that there are a number of networks from the SOS, a number from the SPS, and one from the Appendix 30B database. We can click on these notices and browse inside their data to see all of the data included if we wish. However, you cannot edit this data. It is taken from the databases as filed data. The last part of the template is in defining the processing options. By default, all processing options are turned on, and if you are unsure what to do here, it is recommended to leave them all turned on. However, if you know that certain processes are not needed as part of your analysis, then you can turn them off here to speed up the analysis. The options are split into categories depending on the type of special section that is being processed. For example, for a coordination request, CRC publication, you can turn on or off analysing the ITU identified coordination cases, Appendix 5 analysis, analysis under 9.41, analysis under Appendix 30, Appendix 30A, Annex 4, and lastly, checking for your territory and service area under Radio Regulations number 23.13b. I am going to leave all of the options checked. Once I am done defining the template, I can click on OK. This will add a new template to the IFIC Processing Setup list and prompt me to enter a name. Let me name this example. It is possible for you to define as many templates as you wish. You may wish to define a template with many processing options off for speed and then another with all of them on for more complete analysis. Alternatively, you can define different templates with different network sets. It is up to you. Once we have selected our template, we are ready to start the IFIC processing. So next I will click on OK. Sat-Coord will now retrieve all of the IFIC information associated with the IFIC that we chose to analyse, in this case IFIC 2780, and display it at the top of the screen in a similar manner to the SNL Part B data summary. You can quickly see the main characteristics of the filing, and if you have the PDF associated with any of the special sections in your PDF collection, a PDF icon will appear at the start of the row so that you can easily browse to the PDF data if required. It is very important to reference the PDF data if you are unsure about a result, as it will provide you with the source of the data you are analysing. Once the IFIC information is retrieved, as you can see, Sat-Coord will start processing the IFIC and provide codes and symbols in the columns at the end of each row. I will explain more on these shortly. At the bottom of the screen is a message list which will show you any errors, warnings or messages that occur during the IFIC processing. It is very important that you keep an eye on the messages here, as it will inform you of any issues which may result in the IFIC not being processed properly. For example, if you are missing beam data from your GIMS reference database, as Sat-Coord is unable to perform some of the analysis correctly, errors will appear in this list. You can see that a number of warnings have appeared in the message list. The particular warning here is telling us that it was unable to use the filed antenna pattern for an earth station associated with the LUX G921 network, since the D over lambda is too low, so the default pattern was used. This is standard behaviour in Appendix 8, and you cannot change the LUX G921 data as it is what's filed by the Luxembourg administration, but it is something to be aware of in case you wish to look at this specific case in more detail later. In the middle of the screen is the results data. If we select an item, for example let's pick the first item in the list, the results data informs us that no coordination information was found associated with our networks. This means that neither the ITU nor Sat-Coord identified any potential for harmful interference towards our home networks, i.e. the networks defined in our IFIC Processing Template. I will provide more information about the Results tab shortly, but I want to first discuss the options that are available in the IFIC Processing tab. You can export the IFIC Processing results to a text or a CSV file if you wish. You can change the data associated with this IFIC Processing tab. Or you can refresh the analysis, which will redo all of the analysis from scratch. You can toggle the display of the IFIC contents, the results data, or the message list. It can be useful to have more space dedicated to the results data, so it is sometimes a good idea to hide either the IFIC contents or message list, allowing you more room to see the results. The start and stop buttons control the IFIC processing. If you wish to stop the current processing, you can press the stop button, and if you wish to restart it, you can press the start button. The Perform Analysis button lets you perform the analysis associated with an individual item. The drop-down allows you to select whether to perform the analysis based on the options defined in your template, by retrieving just the ITU findings, or by doing a full analysis. If you don't really want to process an entire IFIC but just check one or two cases, you can stop the IFIC processing and then control the analysis that are performed manually this way. Lastly, Browse to Data allows us to browse to the data associated with a specific item in the IFIC contents list by opening up the data in a new SNS database browsing tab. For example, if I choose the first item in the list, NSS BSS 95E, and then press Browse to Data, a new tab opens up allowing us to browse the data associated with this network. We can, for example, find out frequency information or indeed any other information contained in the SNS database associated with this network. If I now close this tab to go back to our IFIC processing analysis, you can see that the IFIC processing analysis is now completed, and it took just over 3 minutes to complete the analysis. Now every single item in the IFIC contents list has some results data associated with it. Let me browse through the IFIC contents to explain some of the types of results you should expect to see. At the top of the list we can see a number of cases shown in green. The green colour indicates that analysis is completed and that no issues were found, so for these cases comment is not needed. For the grey cases, the ITU processing and Sat-Coord process columns both have a dash in them. If we click on one of these cases, the results informs us that Earth Station notices are not processed by Sat-Coord. For cases that are not processed as they fall outside the scope of the IFIC processing analysis, they are displayed in this way. There were a number of Earth Station notices which were ignored, and the first coordination request is shown in blue. Blue indicates that optional comment cases have been identified. If we click on MADAR 72.5e, the results data gives us a number of tabs. A summary tab, a 9.7 affected networks tab, a 9.7 groups analysis tab, and a 23.13b group analysis, all shown in blue. For comment under 9.7 for cases where a coordination arc is defined that is used to identify potential coordination cases by the ITU, it is possible to comment under 9.41 for any case that falls outside the coordination arc but for which the calculated Appendix 8 delta T over T exceeds 6%. The optional 9.7 cases shown here fall into that category. They have not been identified by the ITU, but comment can be made for these cases if we wish under 9.41. In the Summary tab, the provisions of 9.7 and 23.13b are identified, and we can click on either of these and Sat-Coord will show us the frequency ranges for which these provisions apply. Under 9.7, the ITU provides an affected networks list and also at the group level list every administration that has the potential to be affected. Sat-Coord mimics these findings through the 9.7 affected networks tab and the 9.7 group analysis tab. The 9.7 Affected Networks tab shows us all of the affected networks in our home database which we can comment on under 9.41. Two networks are listed, Picosat 10 and Picosat 8. If we double click on one of these, Sat-Coord will generate the detailed information explaining the reason for its inclusion in this list. Let me toggle the message list off to provide more room to see this data. So it is showing us a list of the different services for which comment under 9.41 can be made, as well as the worst case delta T over T calculation. For this case it is over 600%. If we want to understand this calculation in more detail, we can press the Open Result button to open this calculation in a new Appendix 8 Calculation tab. Let me close this tab. We can alternatively press the Report button to generate a report on this case, providing us information regarding the calculation. If you are only interested in certain services, you can cycle through the service combinations to see the worst case delta T over T calculation associated with each set of services. For example, for FSS versus FSS, the worst case has a delta T over T of just over 20%. Again, we can click on Open Result to get more information on this, or Report to generate a report on this case. Let me next show you the 9.7 Group Analysis tab. Here is listed all of the groups of the new notice which have the potential to affect our home networks. We can double click on a specific group for the list of affected notices in our home database to be shown. We can then double click on one of these networks to see the Appendix 8 delta T over T calculation that results in its identification in Sat-Coord. So for this example, we can see that the group 1146571005 of the new notice MADAR 72E could impact on Picosat 10 or Picosat 8, and the Appendix 8 calculation is shown for Picosat 10 here. As with the 9.7 affected networks data, we can open the result for more information or output a report on this case. Lastly, the 23.13b Group Analysis tab shows the groups in the new network for which our territories are included in their service area and that can be removed under 23.13b. If we double click on one of the groups, a beam plot is shown showing the service area in our territory as well as the frequency range included in this group. Based on this information, we can decide how we wish to deal with this case. Some administrations like to comment for these 9.41 cases and some administrations do not. Let us now move on to the next item in the IFIC contents list, KT-SAT 36W. This case is shown in red, which indicates that comment is recommended. When we click on the item, the results data in this case is shown in white, which indicates that both the ITU and Sat-Coord have identified cases for comment here. The Summary tab shows provision 9.7, and if we click on this, a frequency chart shows the frequencies identified by the ITU and the frequencies identified by Sat-Coord. Frequencies shown in white are optional cases, i.e. 9.41 cases, as with the previous example. There are some differences between the ITU's identified frequency ranges and Sat-Coord's, and we can investigate these in more detail by looking at the Affected Networks and Group Analysis tabs. If we look at the 9.7 Affected Networks tab, you can see that two networks are listed. Again, Picosat 10 and Picosat 8 are both white, indicating that both the ITU and Sat-Coord identified these cases. Once again, we can double click on this to see more detail and the reason why Sat-Coord identified them. For this case, we have a receiving interference case and an optional case. The optional case refers to 9.41 and the receiving interference case refers to a case identified under Appendix 5. If we look at the 9.7 Group Analysis tab, the first thing you'll notice is that a lot of the groups are coloured in yellow. Yellow indicates that the ITU identified these groups, but Sat-Coord did not. The blue groups are optional cases, as with the previous example. If we double click on a yellow case, then no networks will be found by Sat-Coord as it does not identify this group as having the potential to cause interference to our defined home networks. If we open up the PDF associated with KT-SAT36W to look at the affected networks table identified by the ITU, or alternatively you can browse to this data and look at the affected networks data in the SNS Database Browsing tab. If we scroll down to the table, we can see that associated with the Czech Republic administration, 4 networks are listed, CSAT2 and CSAT7, as well as the 2 networks that Sat-Coord identified in the 9.7 affected networks table. Why is this? Well, actually, what's happened is that the CSAT2 and CSAT7 were both suppressed in this IFIC, and in fact we will see them in the IFIC contents list if we scroll down. And so when we defined our home networks in the IFIC template, these 2 networks were not included, and so Sat-Coord did no analysis on these networks. Therefore, the yellow groups all relate to groups that the ITU identified on the basis of their analysis with CSAT2 and CSAT7, both networks which have now been suppressed. IFIC processing is a complex task, and often you need to use the PDF data, the published data, as well as Sat-Coord analysis to understand a specific case. To summarise, for this case, comments should be made with respect to this network for our filed PicoSat10 and PicoSat8 networks. A decision as to whether to include the optional cases under 9.41 can be made by you. Let us now move on to the next case in the IFIC contents, KT-SAT1E. This case is in red again, but this time the provision of 9.7 and Appendix 37.1 have been identified. Appendix 37.1 is similar to 9.7 in that an affected networks table and a group table is shown, but the method for identification is different. Appendix 30 Annex 4 is used, and if you double click on a case you will see that it is actually a PFD downlink limit which determines whether a case is identified or not. As with the Appendix 8 cases we identified earlier, you can find out more detail by clicking on the Open Result or Create a Report on this case by pressing the Report button. So for this case, comments should be made under 9.7 and Appendix 37.1 with respect to the networks identified. In the IFIC contents list, each case should be independently checked, but for this tutorial I want to speed things up a little, so I'll scroll down the list and find the first case identified which is not a coordination request to explain some of the other findings that can be shown. The first APIA, LUX G10.1, is shown in blue as optional. For APIAs that are subject to coordination, it is optional to comment, basically to ensure that the administration is aware of the fact that you also have networks with overlapping frequency bands that they may wish to take into account before submitting their associated coordination request. These cases are handled under provision 9.5b and are identified in Sat-Coord as on the basis of simple frequency overlap analysis. You can click on 9.5b provision in the Summary tab to see the overall frequency bands, or alternatively you can see them on a network-by-network basis in the 9.5b Affected Networks tab. If we continue to scroll down the IFIC contents list, we can see that there are also some APIA filings that are shown in red. The first example is Novastar S1. If we click on this case, we can see that it has been identified under 9.3. This is for APIA cases that are not subject to coordination. For these cases, comment is mandatory if you wish to be included in the resolution of difficulties and then published in the associated API-B for this network. This comment is made through SpaceCom, which is why the SpaceCom column is checked associated with this network in the IFIC contents list. Once again, we can see the overall frequency range identified under 9.3 and also the frequency range on a per network level in the 9.3 Affected Networks tab. These cases are all shown in red as the ITU does not do an analysis to identify cases under 9.3, and so the ITU have not identified any of these. If I continue to scroll down the IFIC contents list, we start to see some cases shown in yellow. These are cases for which no data was found, either because A, the databases you set up in the IFIC setup do not include this network, or B, because it refers to a suppression and so there is no data. As we scroll through these, we can see the suppressions for CSAT2 and CSAT7. The last case I want to talk about is an API-B case which has been highlighted in light red and marked as a check case. This is a case where the API-B has been published but our administration of the Czech Republic has not been identified even though comment could have been made under 9.3 as there is frequency overlap with some of our networks. By the time of the publication of the API-B, the 4-month deadline has passed, so it is not possible to comment now, but this is meant as a checking exercise. For cases where you commented, you should expect to see it validated here, i.e. your administration will be listed by the ITU and so will appear as white in the Summary tab. As you can see, processing an IFIC is a complex task, and I couldn't possibly cover every possible identified provision or case in this short tutorial, but I hope that I've shown you enough. Sat-Coord gives you a powerful tool to highlight each case that has the potential to cause your network harmful interference, and also to provide detailed calculations explaining the reason for identification. Thank you for watching. This ends the IFIC processing tutorial. If you have any questions, please contact us using the information in the description below.